The conscience and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our taste forms, our ideals, suggested largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public. That, my friends, was Edward Bernays from his book, Propaganda. Now, I want you to observe something very briefly here.
I don't know why I bring all these papers. I never look at them.
Oh, you're giving numbers, I do. I go, oh. I said that. Did you really do that?
I just say whatever they write down for me.
That's why you're guessing.
That was two top Ontario doctors of basically the head of their medical practices currently during the great Coof pandemic. They said they don't even read what is presented. They only say what they are told to say, what they write down for me. That is presented from the rebel media. So I'd like to welcome you all, folks. This is All Minus One. My name is Bill. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And like my videos, share all that good stuff. It helps me grow and get the word out. Currently, I am working on and have been uploading to Rumble. I'm working on Library, uploading everything, which is also Odyssey, if I'm not mistaken. In any case, I am going to upload everything everywhere that I can, but primarily YouTube is the way to get myself to grow. However, the information in which I am going to provide is not seen kindly by the folks at YouTube because they, like Edward Bernays suggested here, like to control and manipulate the information. So, let's get into this real quick. From the University of Minnesota, this is their Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy. An article from December 17th, 2020. Data reveals deadliness of the Coof even in young adults. And the article essentially suggests that a certain amount of excess deaths based on the CDC's study have occurred, and now this is one of the leading killers of young people. Excuse me. This is a number here. This is the actual number of people from a period of from March to July who passed away having been positive with the Coof. That is 4,535 people from the ages of 25 to 44. It says, or 38% of all excess deaths in that group. I don't know what the excess deaths are, but I'm going to continue to go through these numbers. Here, excess deaths, 26.5% higher this year among younger adults. This is from the American Organization for Nursing Leadership. It is just a little excerpt, but it says almost 3,000 more Americans died this past year in 2019. Now, this is disputed. This is what they are saying, but the data does not actually suggest this at all. It says 25 to 44-year-olds increased the most by 26.5%. The findings come in a recent report from the Centers of Disease Control on excess deaths in 2020. The prevalence of the Coof in younger populations increased this summer, but the report noted that increase in excess deaths among the group of younger adults might be related to underlying trends and other causes of death. And that is the key thing. Now here it talks about and links to the U.S. U.S. News and World Report. That is here. It basically says the same thing. You can find this yourself. What I want to cover is this. This is from ABC News. Death rates increasing for U.S. adults aged 25 to 44, CDC says. This article is from July 23rd, 2019, long before the pandemic arose. And what does it attribute to? Suicides, homicides, and overdoses have greatly been on the rise. We go through here. It says between 2012 and 17, the rate for black and white people ages 25 to 44 has increased 21%. And Hispanic of the same age range by 13%. And we go through the numbers down here. It talks about, breaks it down racially for some reason, or ethnically, which I find is silly. It has a little chart here of how these numbers have ticked up over the years, and so on and so forth. It says suicide in the United States saw a 19.2 increase in young adults aged 25 to 34 in that time period. And it talks about overdoses were on a decline by around 5% in 2018. That's because the heroin epidemic was actually, by the time it got notice, was on the downtrend. A lot of it in the Appalachians that was occurring initially was going on in the early 2010s. And it had picked up in, actually it was a little bit before the 2010s, in the early 2000s, but had picked up a little bit, and then around 2015 or so sort of peaked and began to fall. Now, I'm not going to cover all that information, but you can fact check me on that if you would like, but just know that it has declined to some bit, and not just in this year. So you can go look at this, but what the importance of bringing up this article a year prior is that this information being presented elsewhere in the U.S. News and World Report, as well as the actual CDC data, is saying something totally different. And this is 2017 leading causes of death from the CDC. Here is the PDF. Now on page 11, this is a 77-page report. We have a breakdown of the various things that cause death in this age group of these young people, the age group in which I am in. This is 19% being other, so we're not sure what that is. But here we have unintentional injuries, suicide at 10%, cancer at 10%, heart disease at 10%, homicide at 6.3%, and then some other things. Now, there is a rise of diabetes and diabetes-related deaths, stroke, and other types of heart disease within young folk because we have a very unhealthy population. We have an obese population. In fact, the numbers where we were talking about a minute ago with Hispanics and blacks might be attributed to the fact that those ethnic groups tend to often be heavier. Whites are more heavy more often in rural areas. In cities, people tend to be leaner. We also know that, especially amongst the black community, a lot of people are larger, they're taller, they're built bigger, and that puts greater strain on the heart. So a lot of this can be explained simply by lifestyle choices. This is from Very Well Health. It says top causes of death at age 25 to 44. This was from a doctor, and it is November 28th, 2019. And he talks about the overall risk of dying is 0.15% per year, which is pretty low. Now, according to this doctor's data, accidents are the primary source of death here. And that makes up 33.6%, 16 being motor vehicle accidents. Then cancer at 22%, heart disease at 18.7%, suicide at 13.6%, homicide at 8.5%, HIV at 7.5%, and chronic liver disease and cirrhosis at 3.6%. Those are people, of course, drinking themselves to death. Stroke at 3.4%, diabetes at 3.1%, flu and pneumonia at 1.4%. Now, that data is different from what we see here. This is an official CDC report. But whatever, sometimes data does conflict. Do I think, though, that the rise of these excess deaths among the 25 to 44-year-olds has anything to do with the pandemic? No, I do not. Not when there are only 4,000 extra deaths, 4,535. It says the majority of excess deaths here, 66%, are due to the Coof. The report found examining estimates can prove comprehension account of mortality related to the Coof pandemic. No, they are guessing at this. This is not true. This is fake news. It says the highest average percent increase, 26.5, in the numbers of fatalities relative to the previous years. This is not true at all. Here we go back to Medium and their coronavirus blog. And we see this little chart here in February, and it ends here in September. It says increases in death highest among people from 25 to 44. And then, of course, the assumption is let's throw out all the data from prior years and assume that it is the Coof because this is the narrative we are trying to fit. I'm not trying to obviously I'm presenting a narrative here, but I'm not trying to present a narrative that isn't based within data, folks. I'm trying to show you what the truth is. And the narratives that they are presenting here simply do not add up. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this article. You can go look it up for yourself and see what it says. It is like a carbon copy of this article. It is a carbon copy of this article. Why? Because these people wish to influence you and scare you and have you locked away so that the Great Reset will come. Here is the actual data. This is from John Miller's Twitter. I believe, and that is at Miller Stream, and I believe he has this pen as a top comment. He posted this December 13th. These are the rates of death, annual death rates in the United States. Here, from 2010 until 2012, it was about 2.5 mil. It rose in 2013 and 2014. It rose again in 2015 and 16. Well, then it rose again in 2017 and 18 to 2.8. Now, if the population is rising, we would actually sort of expect this. And then 2019, 2.9, and as of November, 2.5. And his point is we're actually not on schedule. We're actually lower than normal. Here is all of his data. These are links, PDF links to CDC documents. Now, one of the ways that they measure the rate of death is about a year or two later by sorting out the things that didn't quite work out and make sense. Here from Statista, we have death rate in the United States by age. This is 2017, so this is 3-year-old information that should be accurate. It should be adjusted appropriately. And here we can look at the overall rates per 100,000, right? And then we look at the different groups. Here are the 25 to 44 group, and we can add all of those up per 100,000. The rate is quite low. Here is the leading causes of death in 2018. Now, this is overall, regardless of age. And these are the percentages. The number one killer is, of course, heart disease. Malignant neoplasm. Incidence due to injuries is quite high underneath that. Chronic respiratory disease, cerebral vascular disease, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. Now, if you know anything about Alzheimer's, it is related to cerebral vascular disease as well as perhaps diabetes of the brain. Down here at 2%, we have influenza and pneumonia, and then a few other things, including suicide. Here we have the rates of Coof deaths by age group. This is updated in December 17th, 2020, by age group. This is in New York City, one of the hardest places hit in the United States. And this is per 100,000 people. And here we can see that these numbers are quite low. 12.81 per 100,000 and 45.83 per 100,000. Now, so you all have a little bit of math. You can understand out of the total, out of the total deaths, the total rate of deaths here for that age group, it is a 0.05864% chance. And you get that by taking 100,000, right? You divide it by the number of adding those two up, which is 58.6. So we add this up to 12.81 and the 45.83. Obviously, as people get older, there is more risk. Why is that? Well, generally, people get less healthy as they get older, and your body lacks an ability to recover as well. It is part of aging. It is also known by certain people or theorized, such as the late, great Bruce Ames, that there is an ability in the body to triage nutrients. Many people in the United States are nutrient deficient. We don't get enough vitamin D. We don't get enough magnesium. We don't get enough of just regular exercise or various things that we need to have a functioning, healthy body. We don't get enough vitamin A. We eat too many grains, which causes a huge tax on our systems. We do stupid things like we smoke or we drink. No, not everybody in the U.S. does all this, but I'm just saying these things take their toll on your body. And as you get older, the body does not recover as well. We have seen over the years more and more obese people who are young. We have seen drops in testosterone, largely probably due to things like xenoestrogens, things that are in plastics and in all of our food around pesticides. We're not exactly sure, but they do exist and they do interrupt endocrine function. And so, therefore, we have certain issues in modern westernized society that don't exist in more traditionalist societies. Men who are basically at the age of 40 and older are going to lose 10% of their testosterone per decade. Generally speaking, in the West, this habit is not found when studying other more primitive cultures like people who live simpler lives in nations like Peru. People who live more agrarian lives, that is. Here we have the Coof death rates. This was updated December 9th, 2020 in Italy. Why do I pick out Italy? Because Italy was very, very hard hit. This is very common knowledge, right? And we see that these age groups that we're talking about here, not very hard hit. The age groups, though, of these elderly folks, much harder hit. Here we see some propaganda from the Washington Post. So this says, the Coof pandemic has created nearly 3,000 more deaths than expected in a typical year. This was October 20th, 2020. And again, it's just going down the line with the same stuff I showed you before. But the Washington Post doesn't like to be consistent because the year prior they said there's something terribly wrong. Americans are dying young at alarming rates. And when was this? Well, folks, this was November 26, 2019. And it says death rates from suicide, drug overdose, liver disease, and dozens of other causes have been rising over the past decade for young and middle-aged adults, driving down overall life expectancy in the United States for 3 consecutive years, according to a strikingly bleak study published Tuesday that took a look at the past 6 decades of mortality data. The report, published in the Journal of American Medical Association, was immediately hailed by outside researchers for its comprehensive treatment of a still enigmatic trend and reversal of historical patterns in longevity. And I would, again, attribute most of this to just, several factors. One, the continuing corporatization of the United States, the lack of responsiveness in our federal government. We can talk about the stimulus package. I'll probably make a quick shot about that later on. But basically, something finally got passed, and it ain't much of nothing. Not that I'm a big fan of stimulus, but considering that the government locked you down and kicked you out of your job, and in some places people were being evicted, then they ought to do something about it, especially for something so survivable. It says, despite spending more on healthcare than any other country, the United States has seen increasing mortality and falling of life expectancy from the ages 25 to 64. Well, this has nothing to do with how much money we spend. In fact, we keep people alive, like barely. We keep them weak and crippled. How many times do you see someone on an electric cart going to Walmart these days? I don't recall that back in the 1980s and early 90s when I was a kid. Didn't exist. There might be a few obese people, but not like there are now. People eat a lot of junk. And places like the World Health Organization and other elitist types like James Cameron are trying to tell you, hey, don't eat meat. Go eat vegetables. Yet, since the government got involved in this back in the 1970s with the McGovern report, and saying that meat was bad for you and caused heart disease and diabetes has gone up because they've been grain feeding you to keep you stupid and weak and docile. In Soviet brainwashing programs, you know what they fed you? They fed you grain and no meat, no fat, so that you would be weak and docile. This is what we do to prisoners as well. It says, although earlier research emphasized raising mortality among non-Hispanic whites in the United States, a broad trend detailing in this study cuts across gender, racial, ethnic lines by age group and highest relevant jump in death rates from 2010 to 2017. 29% has been among people of age 25 to 34. So I read to you earlier one article from ABC News where it said that it was 21%. Correct? And here in this Washington Post article, it says 29%. So again, data is different depending on where you read it. Here, this says 26%. 26.5 higher this year among younger adults. No, it's not. It's not at all. This is people trying to convince you of things that aren't true, much like they are trying to censor people for talking about the election or the Coof pandemic, which has a very, very high rate of survival. The findings are sure to fuel political debate about the causes and potential solutions because of the geography of rising death rates overlaps to a significant extent the states and regions that are hotly contested in the run to the 2020 presidential election. Yeah, well, I don't think this needs to be political. This is just understanding what's going on in health advice. And of course, it shows certain areas. And this doesn't surprise me. Ohio, West Virginia, higher death rate, large rate of obesity. South Dakota, wherever else, these things are going to be different depending on the population. Here it says the states with the biggest percentage rise in death rates among working age people is in this decade, 23.3% is New Hampshire, the first primary state, and so forth. I'm not going to go into all this political stuff, but please go read this Washington Post article from some years ago and compare it to the gibberish they're putting out today as if they didn't write this article last year at almost the exact same time. Here is the actual study from the CDC, mortality among adults ages 25 to 44 in the United States during the Coof pandemic. It says because younger adults have far lower infection fatality rates, less attention has been focused on the mortality burden in this demographic. And then it says here specifically about the age group, again, 25 to 44. In this age group during the pandemic period to all drug overdose deaths and opioid-specific overdose deaths in each of the 10 health and human services regions during the corresponding year of 2018. So what it's saying here is that they compared it and the overdoses aren't as bad. Well, I'm going to show you that number right here. Here is all-cause mortality. 74,000 in 2020 as of September 6th. From the period of March 1st to July 31st, 2020, 14,155 more than during the same period in 2019. A 23% relative increase. What did this say again? Oh, it said 38%. What did this say again? It said 26%. Why is the data conflicting? Well, let's see here. It says with a peak of 30% occurring in May, okay, highest time of infection, talks about some states and whatever else, certain regions, and it says, and deaths exceeded 2018 unintentional opioid overdose deaths during at least 1 month. Combined to 2,450 Coof deaths were recorded in these three regions from the pandemic, and the 2,445 opioid deaths. So a difference of 5 people. And then it says the data presented here, since it's been updated as a result, an additional 1,902 all-case mortalities, yada, 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 and it goes forth. Well, folks, if you do a little bit of math here, if you look at the total all-cause mortality and you look at what they attribute to the Coof, mind you, what did the CDC say? Only 6% had died of this alone. Most of these people were elderly or had pre-existing conditions. I know there are people going around saying, so-and-so died, they didn't have any pre-existing conditions. None that you knew of, and I'm not saying that this thing can't kill you otherwise. What I'm saying is it's not worth locking down an entire society and destroying their economy and creating other deaths due to deaths of despair, suicide, and addiction. Those kinds of things, which is happening. It's destroying people's mental health. But let's look at the numbers real quick. We take that number, all-cause mortality right here. We take that Coof number, and we find out it's 3%. But that doesn't quite jibe either with what the data has presented earlier. Here's another article, again, claiming the same thing. These people just put out these articles over and over again, stating what the other articles said and passing off as their own work. It is not. This is from News, Medical, Life Sciences. Now the leading cause of death among 25 to 44-year-olds. No, it is not. That is an outright lie. This is October 26. Here is an older article I have used before, but this is talking about the Coof deaths in the U.S. by age and race. And this was June 23rd. And I just want you to see this little data here by the group death of age and the percentage of deaths and like how striking this is of survival rates. 25 to 44-year-olds. We can add these numbers up or these percentages up. It's not that high. And for me, worth the risk. If you're scared to go out and risk life, then I don't know what to tell you. You never would have survived for most of all of human history. So here, this is from Macro Trends, U.S. death rate from 1950 to 2020. And actually, I have this to 2030 because this will project out what the UN projects. So back here is the 1950s. Look at the rate, 9.594. We're below that. We are currently below that. That dropped here in the 1970s. Went up a little bit. What happened in the 80s, late 80s? Well, we started to go into an economic recession. At the same time, I guess things got better, less stress. Stress causes heart disease, by the way, folks. If people are stressed out about this Coof pandemic right now, they're more likely to acquire heart disease. This is a well-known cause of heart disease. Heart disease is generally thought of anymore by anybody who reads the literature as a product of your body having severe inflammation within the veins, the arteries, and the heart itself, and therefore it essentially starts to break down. Cholesterol doesn't cause it. What cholesterol does is it goes there to heal it, but as the stress continually induces inflammation, the cholesterol has to continue to deposit, and then it causes a plaque, and that plaque is then, of course, what causes things like heart attack and stroke later on. But if we go here and we start looking, this is that rise that we were talking about. Here's 2010, and this rises up and up and up and projected out to 2030. Now, if I do just some quick things, look, it keeps rising if I project out to 2050. Why? Because this is based on some sort of UN data. Here we can go through the death rates of all these nations, where they're at, where the United States is at compared to this. This is important because when I talk about who wasn't hit hard by the Coof, it's often nations with good health, like Japan. I don't know about Portugal or Italy, but the elderly were hit there quite hard. Denmark did not have that high of a death rate. The UK seems to be healthier than us, but again, you can't just attribute rate of death to health alone because health isn't the only factor. People in the US might drive faster. They might do more drugs. I don't know. They might be in gangs. The 25 to 44-year-old group, actually it's more like 15 to 44-year-old group, are the people who commit all the crimes. They are in the majority of violent acts, and they are mostly men. Here, just brought up from a little article that I guess was featured on, well, I've covered this before, but I guess was featured on, whatchamacallit? Oh, what's his name? Sorry. Rush Limbaugh or something like that. But this little article here from WKMI about this university student who did the data and said, no, the excess deaths are the same. I've covered this before. It's right here. They took it down. That's from Yanni Guai or however you pronounce her last name. And it says here, redacted by the newsletter. But what happened was this young lady went through, looked at all the deaths, the excess deaths and whatever else, and said, no, these people would have died anyways. And I've covered this before because back in April or May or something like that, there was a BBC article and a doctor talking about excess deaths and saying that they would adjust the numbers about a year later. And he said the majority of these people that we are seeing are elderly and they were going to die within a year anyways, most likely, which is why we will take them off of the numbers of excess deaths. This is important. You must understand that this is how these things work. This is why following this in real time now does not work. Meanwhile, we have this going on. From Breitbart, CDC overdoses hit record 81,230, accelerated during the Coof pandemic. Don't like Breitbart? Okay, I have a local news source, WLWT5, which is an NBC affiliate. And it talks about the data again here. But hey, maybe you're like, Bill, but you read these other articles and you didn't have the CDC pulled up. Actually, I do. From the CDC, overdose deaths accelerate during COVID-19. Do you remember back in the, early part of the Coof, when a couple doctors got kicked off of Facebook and whatever else for suggesting such a thing would happen? Here, from Nature, this is August 2020, the data was suggesting something else. Well, it still says the same thing, but they weren't trying to convince you of more lockdowns and control and bringing in the Great Reset and whatnot. It says the Coof is most deadly if you are older and male. New data reveals the risk. Well, there's no new data here, folks. I've been saying this time and time and time again. Because you know what I did when we first went into lockdowns? I got every piece of data and every news article I could get my hands on and read what was going on. And we've known this since April, since the end of April, the beginning of May. There is nothing new under the sun when it comes to this. We know about everything that we need to know about this. It affects older people for the most part. And it affects people who have certain conditions that probably would have died anyways. And there is very little risk to others. Yet now they're talking over in the UK about a new spread, right? A new strain that's a super strain that the vaccine might not work against. This is all nonsense to control you. For every 100,000 people infected with the Coof who are under the age of 50, almost none will die. For people in their 50s, nearly in early 60s, about 5 will die. That is per 1,000 people. The risk then climbs steeply as the years accrue. For every 1,000 people in their mid-70s or older who are infected, around 116 will die, which is why we need to protect these people and not do the things that Andy Cuomo and Gretchen Whitmer and, what is his name, Scott Wolf and Tim Scott, those people, if I'm not mistaken, if I got those names correctly, did, and put people into nursing homes. And how do we know this? Because we have studies from around the world, not just the United States. And it talks about here, trends in the Coof deaths by age have been clear since early in the pandemic. Duh. Research teams looking for the presence of antibodies against the SARS-CoV-2 in people in the general population in Spain, England, Italy, Geneva, and Switzerland have now qualified the risk. How about that? And then it goes on about it being not very much of a big deal. Now, generally, men, this says older men more at risk. Generally, men die younger. If you go through my videos I've done on this earlier, previously, months ago, I talk about this specifically. You start thinking, folks. Here's the CDC data again. This is the Coof tracker. Now, this is the cases, total cases, 17 million. Deaths in the last 7 days, 0.8. 0.8. Now, that's per 100,000, but still, total deaths. Okay, this number here isn't correct, though, if you adjust for the pre-existing conditions. And here we can look at who's had what and where. So here in my home state of West Virginia, deaths in the last 7 days, 1.2. Total deaths, 1,000. We've been in this thing for months. People still go to Walmart every day. I was just there. I had to get some things for dinner. You say, well, but Bill, you're wearing masks. Yeah. And they don't work either. I literally wear a handkerchief and often bring it down. It's nonsense. You're brainwashed. Here we can see the rates are much lower. Here in Florida, they're doing quite well. And yet they are highly open. And their governor has said that they will not do lockdowns again. And in fact, if you want to get some real information, look at the live streams that their governor does. Watch them. What he does with medical personnel. He's not listening to the globalist. Unlike these sick folks up in Canada who are specifically saying, oh yeah, I just do what they tell me to do. I just read what they tell me. But again, you have to go through the data. Now, if I click this little button here, see, I'm on deaths. If I go to cases, oh my goodness, 73 cases per 100,000 people. Folks, this is just absolute absurdity. Yeah, cases in the last 7 days, 72. In a state of almost 2 million people. Mostly rural. Virginia, well, this whole part of Virginia that's very populated here, I could see why the numbers would be up. Same with Maryland. I mean, I grew up in Maryland. I grew up out here in Western Maryland. But the center of Maryland is a big, giant sprawl and essentially a suburb of D.C. Cases are way up in Texas. Way up. Go to deaths. 0.7. Folks, you can do this for yourselves, but most of you won't. Here's another one. Kind of the last thing I have on this. The American Institute for Economic Research, Asymptomatic Spread, Revisited, November 2020. And talks about the fog of war, and basically people are being irrational and panicking. It talks about flattening the curve. And sometimes almost, it says gradually and almost imperceptible, the rationale for the lockdowns changed. Flatten the curve became an end in itself apart from hospital capacities. 350 hospitals furloughed workers. That failure was embarrassing enough given the overwhelming costs. Schools closed. Yeah. Commercial rights were vanquished. Shelter-in-place orders from wartime were imposed. Travel nearly stopped. Large events were canceled. Yeah, and the food supply, the food chain broke down. I don't know if you recall, but there was a medical ship, a Navy ship, sent to New York for all the supposed beds that they were going to need. They didn't need them. Of course, Cuomo killed the majority, 6,000 people in the nursing homes by doing the policies that he did. And then I believe the last time I covered this, I showed you an old article, or I brought it up, but whatever, where they found that 60% of the people were already retirees, or largely retirees, who had died at home. They were people who didn't have a lot of social interaction in the first place. And he was like, oh, I'm surprised. Yeah, you're an idiot. It's what you are. Basically living off of your daddy's legacy. And most New Yorkers don't like you, but for some reason the city keeps re-electing you. And then here we have a little graph about asymptomatic spread. Asymptomatic spread was the answer given to the great question. I'm not sick, so why should I have to be locked down anyways? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Why are half the PCR tests positive assigned to people who otherwise seem to be perfectly fine? All these valid questions came to answer by this one phrase, asymptomatic spread. You might not feel sick. You might not even have symptoms. You could even be a worse super spreader without knowing it. Yeah, this is just not accurate at all based on any sort of virology, or epidemiology in the past. Doesn't exist, folks. I can spread if I spit on you by mistake through talking. I can spread if I cough on you. Yes, when I breathe out, there are moisture particles that escape. It actually increases while you wear a mask. Believe it or not. That is what the data suggests. It's what all the science suggests prior to 2020. All of a sudden, the science is new and has changed. Largely due to probably the bolstering up of research grants. Anyways, it says the head of the WHO Emerging Disease and Zooness Unit told a press conference that from the known research, asymptomatic spread was very rare. Well, just recently there was a study in China, not that I trust China, saying the same thing. They're telling you to stay inside. Now it's wintertime here in the States. Most of the states are getting chilly. There's not as much sunlight, but you need that vitamin D to fight this. And this goes on to talk about that. I wrote at the time. What this suggests, of course, is that there is nothing mysteriously magical or insidious about the new virus. It behaves like the viruses that scientists have been studying for 100 years. Yes, it needs a medium of transition. Sexually transmitted diseases need body fluids to be transmitted, right? It needs blood or semen or vaginal fluid if you're transmitting HIV, for instance. There is a mode of transmission. It has to be very specific. What we do with normal viruses is be careful around others when they have symptoms. We don't cough or sneeze on people and generally stay home when we are sick, and that's how it's always been. You don't need to lock down to achieve that. You just proceed with life as normal. But none of this is about treating life as normal. It's about the Great Reset and causing people to essentially live in fear and comply. So again, this article goes on. I'm not going to go through all this stuff. This talks about nature, post-lockdown, SARS-CoV-2 nucleic acid screening, nearly 10 million residents of Wuhan. And this is the article, or sorry, the study I was talking about. There was a study early on, not again that I trust the Chinese at all, but it just makes sense that there's no real outdoor transmission. This dies very quickly in the sunlight. Viruses are very weak. They tend to. HIV does not survive when exposed to air. Something like hepatitis C, however, will last for weeks. And you need to use bacteria. You need to use bleach to kill it. But I think what I'm going to do, folks, is in the very near future this week, I'm going to cover suicide rates, some numbers on all that information, so we could talk about these deaths and how some data is trying to suggest that this isn't the way, that these suicide rates aren't increasing, yet right here I have an article that I'll probably read from in a few days that it is. But I want you to recall the Great Barrington Declaration, and that these doctors think for the impact of mental health and also the economy that we should not be locking down in such a way. This is very, very important. And understand that these folks are trying to do what Edward Bernays said. They're trying to manipulate your mind and control you. These folks here said very specifically, these Ontario doctors, I just say whatever they write down for me. I don't even know why they gave me these papers. And that's what this is about right here. This first article I brought up, it's just people repeating things, not actually digging into the data. We know that the rate of death has been increasing for a long period of time, according to the CDC specifically. I have the CDC stats here. And we have to understand that, generally speaking, that the rates of death are actually not necessarily any higher based on CDC data. John Miller, that is at Miller Stream on Twitter, has this on his Twitter. Go find it. Go look at it yourself. Go compare the data. Right here from the Washington Post once again. There's something terribly wrong with Americans dying young at alarming rates, talking about that same statistics, and now they wish to manipulate it here with a CDC study, trying to blame it on the Coof, yet there is absolutely no proof whatsoever. What there is proof of, though, is this, that overdoses are increasing at an alarming rate. Over 81,000 drug overdoses occurred in the United States in the last 12 months. You think that that's getting higher because of the lockdowns? Because I would say probably. Folks, you got to do more research, or you got to start sharing and spreading, people like myself who are trying to seek the truth and explain it to you in a brief, concise kind of way. We can't keep doing this stuff. With all that said, hey guys, I do a live show every Wednesday at 7 p.m. called The Ends Justify the Memes. If you guys want to go over there, Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, we are on YouTube and DLive. I don't know why my computer's not uploading things appropriately, but here we go. DLive, it's at ends_justify_memes. You can find it at the Ends Justify the Memes on YouTube. And nothing wants to come up. I do have a Subscribe Star. If you want to go over there under All-1 and just donate, it's a measly $5 a month. And again, we are doing a live show every Wednesday since it's a day before Christmas Eve. We'll be doing one this Wednesday, and we'll be covering some Christmas memes and talking about other stuff. We've been doing a weekend show on occasion with our friend Kizza GT. We won't be this weekend because it's the day after Christmas, but we should be on the 2nd of January. We will be back. So with all that, folks, this has been All-1. My name's Bill. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and keep sane in this crazy world we are living in. I hope that you all are being truth seekers and you are fighting this technocracy, this machine that is against our very will and freedom. With all that said, I wish you all well.